Thanks for joining us. Today's session is on Reimagine, Design, Simulate. It's about designing future-ready processes, how modeling and simulation prepare you for AI. So just a couple of housekeeping things here. Everybody's on mute, but we encourage you to submit questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll cover those at the end of the session. And a link of the recording of today's recording will be sent to all the registrants in a follow-up email. So with that, let's take a look at the topics for today. So this is how we're going to spend the next 25, 30 minutes. We'll have some context to the session about the moment AI creates for businesses. And then Shoaib will move to the trap, improving a process which really should be reimagined. And then he'll move to designing the future state. And once you have that future state, then you moved into simulation where you can test, validate, and gain more confidence about that future state model, if you will. And then some discipline approach to transformation, just preparing for AI in the right way. And then we'll close out and have a Q&A session. And I first want to introduce Shoaib Javid. He is our Chief Product Officer here at iGraphics. He leads the product vision for the company, namely the iGraphics Process 360 Live platform. He's had deep expertise in digital transformation, process intelligence, and intelligent automation. And he's helped a number of global enterprises move from being reactive process improvement to intentional future state design. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Shoaib.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. So we're trying this short form content and hope you like it, right? So we don't bore you for a whole hour and get to the point a lot faster with things we want to talk about. So today, right, let me start by talking about how people typically implement agentic AI within their organization, right? So the conversation goes something like this when I talk to customers. Hey, our executive management wants us to implement more AI and use AI to improve operations, right? And then what people do is they just say, okay, fine, I have this task that I do, maybe an agentic AI implementation could do it better. So I have companies that help me implement these agents, right? So you might have agents from ServiceNow or Salesforce, or there might be some other custom built ones. And then you say, okay, fine, I have now implemented agentic AI because there are agents doing parts of the work that I typically do, right? So I just take what I do today, I get an agent to do it, and then suddenly I have several dozen agents doing something, and I have no idea what they do or whether it's better or not, right? So that's typically how it goes, and people want to check the box, right? They want to say, okay, we have implemented agentic AI in our organization. Hey, we have hundreds of agents. What are you talking about? Like, we're done. So that's exactly the wrong way to think about this, right? Because implementing agentic AI gives you an opportunity to rethink or to reimagine how you do things and how you can do them better. So for those of us, right, that are in this process design, process implementation field for a while, understand this more intuitively, right? That, hey, you got to look at the entire process. You got to figure out first how you want things to work before actually implementing anything, right? And again, if you want to succeed for the long term, not just get quick one-time successes, how should you actually think about the problem, right? So that's the topic of the webinar, right? How do you look at an entire process? How do you reimagine it? And then how do you make sure that when you do implement AI agents, that they fit within that overall framework, okay? All right. So again, the trap, right, is that you simply want to take what you do today and then do it slightly better, right? So you figure out the current processes, right? You use process discovery. Of course, you could use process mining. You could use information in people's heads. You could use your standard operating procedures, whatever it is, right? You have some way to figure out what you do today. You then say, okay, fine, I have this processor. I do. There might be activities that I could automate, or there might be activities I could implement with agentic AI. Let me just go build that, and then basically I'm done, right? So what you're doing then is you're locking yourself into incremental gains, right? You're not fundamentally changing anything. You're not improving a whole lot. You're just simply saying, I'm taking what I do and I'm implementing parts of it with agentic AI, right? So that's why you are only going to get incremental gains. You're going to increase complexity because you're suddenly adding in a lot of automation without thinking about how that impacts you overall in the medium term or long term. How do you manage it? How do you maintain it? How do you make sure that you are actually getting the improvements that you want? So how do you measure that these agents are actually improving for you? How do you make sure that you're not breaking some compliance rules that you know that you want to do? So if your process that you're currently using, your process model that you're currently using to implement agentic AI is 5 years old or 10 years old, what's the point, right? It's already obsolete. Okay. So you're applying modern technology to outdated processes, which again is, I think, madness, right? So optimizing existing outdated processes with AI is not really transformation, right? It's just doing the same thing before. And we've gone through this before. If you know about RPA and how much potential RPA had when we started implementing robotic process automation. And then just imagine where you are today, right? It really hasn't delivered that promise. And I really hope that AI doesn't go the same way. Okay. All right. So now that we have looked at, what not to do, let's think about what to do. So the first thing that I recommend, right, is to really look at the process that you have today and say, hey, given the fact that we have this new technology and all the experience that we already have with this particular process, this kind of operation, how should it be, right? So what outcomes should we expect rather than what does the process do today, right? Like, okay, for this particular area of our company or this particular business unit, what do we want, right? So that outcome is the first thing you need to think about, because that's AI will not create or would not produce the outcome for you, right? You have to think about, okay, well, what outcome do I want, and then I can use that outcome and use AI to deliver me those outcomes, and then have a way to measure it, right? So you do want to look at the desired business result first and foremost. Then, right, you want to make sure, right, that you're breaking the silos early, because you want to look at that process end to end. Because even if you're optimizing one area and other areas are not optimized, then you will create bottlenecks, right, where things might be worse. Because if you're manufacturing, for example, your product faster, and you're unable to manage the logistics of shipping it or distributing it, then you're just piling up inventory, right? And you're piling up inventory costs. So things like that, right? You gotta look at that end-to-end process, right? So you do need to look at uh, across functional areas how this thing works. The third thing, right, and this people just overlook completely, and it comes back to bite them later, is the governance, right? The compliance, the governance, the orchestration, the managing agents part. Nobody cares, because hey, they think that's overhead. The agent will just magically do what it needs to do, and it will learn from other agents, and it'll be fine. But you do need to build for governance, right? You need to make sure that there is a way for you to govern the agent, there is a way for you to monitor them, there's a way for you to measure them, there's a way for you to understand that they haven't broken rules that they're not supposed to, right? So there is this orchestration layer on top, which is based on the process, which can't be ignored, right? And then everyone, if you're in this webinar, you're probably already in the process management field, and you do understand this aspect, right? That you need to understand the full process. You need to be able to measure, you need to be able to monitor, you need to be able to see if you're breaking rules, right? And then the last part, right, is, don't get hung up on how things used to be or how you do things today, right? Challenge them, right? Don't accept constraints. Don't say something like, "Hey, we've always done it this way," right? And it's be very hard to change that. Don't do that, right? I think you should question every reason for why you do something, right? Don't take it for granted that just because you did something one way, that's the only way that you could do it. So you do need to challenge legacy assumptions, because legacy assumptions were driven by limitations of the past, and those limitations probably don't exist today, right? So make sure that you move beyond the existing constraints. Okay. All right, so that's about thinking about the problem, designing basically a new process, right? Which is outcome driven, which is end to end, which has compliance and governance built in, and doesn't get restrained by previous constraints. Okay. So once you do have that design, you can now simulate this, right? You can say, okay, well, if I was able to do this and I implemented AI agents to do that, what would happen, right? And again, this is great because now you can build a digital model in process intelligence solutions like ours, and it will tell you, if you were to do these things, what would happen, right? You can take data and you can run it through the model, right? Which allows you to test your decisions. You can do what if scenarios, you can tweak, tune, do other things. You can start to surface bottlenecks, failures, edge cases a lot sooner, right? So simulation will give you that confidence that the things that you have reimagined and the way that you want to implement the new process will actually produce the business outcomes or improve the business outcomes that you were looking to produce or improve, right? So you can measure it in a much better way before you spend a whole lot of money building the new world, right? So, and what we are looking to do here is to make this easier, right? So can you just gather the data you need for the process, and can we design and run hundreds of simulations for you, and then give you the three that work best, and you can say, okay, well, these three designs would work best for us because we want to optimize those 5 or 6 KPIs or metrics that we want to improve, right? So the simulation can help you do a lot of that before you spend money doing costly implementations, which then you have to roll back. Okay, so let's try to now put some of these things together, right? So the way you do this then, right, how do you put it all together, right? So the first thing you do is you reimagine, you redesign your existing processes. Don't take ones that already exist and try to implement them, right? So you reimagine how you might want to do things, you design the solution, you then run simulations to test it, and then you deploy and scale, right? So on the deployment and scaling part, right, it's important to understand how you're going to measure things, and how do you know what success looks like, and how do you measure it along the way, right? So you need some way to monitor the AI agents. You need some way to track targets over a period of time, right? So you can see how and how much things improve over some period of time, right? So that period of time could be, how are things doing on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and so on, right? So monitoring results that occur from AI agents is important, right? Because again, the AI agents create data, right? And they have their own hallucinations of how good they are. But again, you're running not one agent, but you're running maybe several agents that implement one process. So you need to be able to collect data from all of them, right? Run that through a process perspective so that you can measure what they do, and then you can aggregate those measurements across the process. And then when you aggregate the measurements across the entire process, you can then look at process related KPIs, right? And say, okay, have those improved and by how much, right? So you get a real view of the improvement, not necessarily individual agent view of the improvement, right? So, so in some ways, right, what we do with process mining, where we are monitoring production processes, now goes more toward not just mining from applications, but actually mining from AI agents, and then seeing, how the process is performing overall, right? So how do we aggregate data from multiple agents into a single process view, and then see how the process is doing, and then run more hypotheses and more simulations to make them better. And then when you do that, go tell the agents to do something different, right? So that's one aspect of, being able to monitor and measure. The other reason you monitor is, of course, you want to lower the risk of non-compliance, right? So for governance purposes, of course, if agents do something wrong, you need to know as fast as possible, right? So when you see something happening in your process that shouldn't be happening, you need to stop it out, immediately, right? You need to trigger an alert or trigger a response that says, don't do this. Let's roll back and make sure that the compliance step that you missed does actually occur, right? So this whole conformance compliance aspect of process management is really important now in the AI age, right? And it needs to be done even in an even more automated way and a faster way, so that you don't compound compliance problems hundredfold, right? Because agents work so fast, right? So this whole orchestration governance layer is necessarily tied into the process layer, and that actually gives you more confidence that you can implement AI agents at scale, and that bad things won't happen if they suddenly don't do what you expect. Okay. All right. So let's summarize the things we talked about. And as I said, this is a short webinar and we're trying the short form content. You can let us know if the short form content works. We only discuss one topic at a time. So in this topic, right, what did we say? We said, look, you got to reimagine first before you do anything else. Don't try to improve with AI old processes, right? Design intentionally, right? First, think about the goals, the outcomes, the business requirements before you actually just go and implement an agent, right? And then we said, look, simulate before deploying, right? So there are technologies available, from our platform, for example, that do allow you to run complex simulations, and the simulations tell you how things would go before you actually make mistakes. And then the simulations later, right? So when you're actually running your agents and collecting data and monitoring, the simulations will tell you how you may improve further, right, as you go along. So if agents are doing something one way now, and you run the data through simulations and say, hey, maybe they should orchestrate in a different way, or they should interact in a different way, or even that they should do different things, then you can do continuous improvement through that aspect, not just a one-time simulation before deploying, right? So so what we'll do next, right, is, so this was the, okay, how do you think about the problem? How do you start? How do you implement AI into your processes? The next webinar, right, we will discuss some more about embedding trust and governance, right, into AI-ready operations. So that's coming next month, on how do you drill down further into the governance topic or the compliance aspects of running agents. And so I'll stop here, and I'm now ready for questions. So if you have any, please let me know. Don, if some questions have come up, please.
Yes. We have a couple of questions. Sorry. So I encourage you to, again, enter your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom. The first one is, my company is a mid-sized organization with over 500 employees attending 3 states in the US. We have multiple branches with different services offered. We use Monday.com to organize most of our tasks and processes. Does iGraphics offer integration with Monday.com?
I don't know off the top of my head
Mhm.
whether we have worked with Monday, so we can get back to you on that specifically. But yeah, we do actually integrate with enterprise applications where we help you do process discovery by connecting to them, right? We don't do automation ourselves, but we have automation partners that could orchestrate flows across your enterprise applications, right? But we would definitely help you understand and design processes around applications like Monday.com.
Okay. The next one is, what are the typical steps for the conformance/compliance model for automation?
Yeah. So typical steps is right. The first step towards compliance or conformance is you need to understand what your model process is, right? So how you actually want things to work. So if you have a process model that says this is how we would like our process to work, then that's the first step, right? To having a model that conforms to for compliance reasons. You then, when you're running your processes, right, you can then monitor them, right? So when you monitor data from the running process, you can run it through process mining, and it will tell you what you're actually doing. And then what you do is you compare your model to your actual, and you can find deviations and problems. And you can do this at a process level, but you might also be able to do it at a task level. And so you can do it at different levels of the process. And then you can highlight anomalies or highlight non-conformance, and maybe even have automated procedures or processes to fix them right when they do occur. So that those are the typical steps. But of course, we can take that question offline if you have a more details about a specific process that you want to talk about.
Okay, the next one, how much time do you recommend to analyze one of the end-to-end processes in general?
In general, right, I think that analysis should be a few days, right? It can be more than that. Now, of course, there are processes that are very complex, but I'm talking about standard process.
Does iGraphics have integrations with Dynamics 365, Icertis, and or Workday Financials and HCM?
Let me check because you have multiple applications that you asked about. So why don't we just send you an answer? We have integrations into multiple applications built in. We have APIs, we have connectors. So the answer is generally yes, but let me look at those specific ones and then send you back an answer in writing.
Okay. I also had one sent to me by one of our customers, Shoaib, in the insurance industry, and it's about sustainability. The question is, as organizations redesign future state processes with AI in mind, how do you see environmental sustainability factoring into AI adoption? For example, many teams want to use AI to improve efficiency, but are also mindful of the increased energy use associated with large scale compute workloads. Are are there best practices or upcoming iGraphics capabilities that support organizations in using AI responsibly from an energy use and environmental impact standpoint?
Yeah, so this is a topic that I like a lot. I think you can model sustainability metrics into your process designs, right? You can say, like, I want to measure, certain metrics related to sustainability, just like I measure any other performance metrics in my process, right? So when you design processes and you reimagine processes, and if you believe that you're going to implement them with AI, you can say, I would like to measure at a business activity level, as well as say an entire process level, certain sustainability metrics, right? Now, when I run the process and I monitor the process, I can then measure those metrics in the production process, right? I can say, okay, well, I'm implementing this with AI and I estimate that it's going to use this much energy to do. What is the, what is the output, right? So you can get those metrics back through process mining into the system, right? And you now have data, right? So you can say, okay, well, I modeled certain sustainability metrics. Here are the actual values of those sustainability metrics. Here's how they apply to the entire process. And then what you can do is to say, okay, if I wanted to improve sustainability metrics, I can now run simulations and what if scenarios that could tell me the best, say, trade-off, right? A trade-off between efficiency and sustainability. And simulation will be good at doing things like that. It will say, look, hey, I might be able to improve sustainability by certain percentage, but then you may have to live with a slightly lower efficiency, right? So you can't get everything, but if you are concerned about sustainability, then take slightly less efficient processes, and then so there's a balance, right? And like again, starting to model sustainability metrics from the start when you design processes and being able to measure them in execution processes will then give you enough data to run simulations and try to optimize it and so on, and then track that optimization, right? So you can track sustainability as you implement new processes and see how you're doing. Very interesting topic, right? We are looking at standard metrics right now to build those, but maybe in the future, right, once we look at some use cases, we might build in additional features for that.
Thanks, Shoaib. We have another question here from the audience. I have seen many instances where companies seek to deploy AI agents to improve for which there is no specific process or where the process is unknown. For example, repository search to retrieve key sales or marketing content. What advice do you have for these instances?
Yeah, so I wouldn't try to force fit them into a process, right? So if you're doing individual productivity things that are typically not tied into company processes, let it be, right? I don't think you should restrain users from doing things that help them to increase their individual productivity, right? Not everything will fit into a company process, right? Because for your company, you might have, say, a few hundred core processes that run the business, right? That span multiple departments and that are core to your business. Those are the ones where I would look at, the things that I talked about, right? But if you have individuals or people that are just pulling information or answering questions or things like that, and you don't have a lot of governance concerns, I would just let people be more as productive as they can.
A follow-up to that, they meant to improve tasks.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can simulate task improvements too, right? And so you can reimagine how you do something, because what we are doing, right, again, is as we look at individual tasks and improving them, we share that, right? So if we find that someone is actually able to do individual tasks better, we can then share that information or skill, more specifically with other parts of the organization, and we might use that to create a process so that other people benefit from the efficiency that was gained for that one individual task across multiple organizations, right? So that's an area that we can think about.
Well, we don't have any other questions. Shob, can I ask you to switch to the last slide there? I think my email address is on there.
Yeah.
And if we didn't answer your question fully, please send me the question